Hello, I'm Bob Challoner, the President and CEO of Southampton Hospital, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Focus on Southampton Hospital, your monthly program about the events, people, and services at your community hospital. And today I'd like to welcome Tory Masters, who is a peer specialist, certified peer specialist, who's created a program at Southampton regarding mood disorders and helping people that are suffering with mood disorders. And we'll be talking about what those are and what these programs are. So I'd like to welcome you, Tory.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Here. And number one, let me just ask you a little bit about yourself, and before we get into specifics of mood disorders and what is a certified peer counselor, but tell me about yourself a little bit, and how'd you end up out here in Southampton Hospital? It's always fascinating to hear the journey of people and how they made it out to the East End.
Yeah, it was circuitous. I actually grew up out here in the summertime, but I've lived in the city my whole life.
Okay.
And I started to attend mood disorder support groups in Manhattan in the early 1990s because I was diagnosed with having a mental illness.
Okay.
And so I started attending these groups in New York, and they really were a lifeline to me, and they helped me in my own recovery process to such an extent that I felt that I wanted to dedicate my life to doing this for other people. So I came out here to do the same, which a few years ago.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And I know that mental illnesses are often a very misunderstood area of healthcare, and unfortunately an area that are often stigmatized. And you're a certified peer specialist.
Correct.
And tell us a little bit about that. What does that mean?
Okay. Well, first of all, you mentioned stigma, and stigma is very much tied into why peer specialists are of value in the mental health community. And traditionally, mental health professionals were therapists and psychiatrists and continue to be. And there was one component that was missing. And you've heard of, AA, for example, has peers running those groups.
Right.
There was the component that was missing was, how do we get somebody who has a mental illness to accept the fact that they have an illness that they need to learn how to manage?
Right.
How do we get to that person? How do we bring them out of denial?
Right.
Because the stigma is so great that people isolate and don't want to admit that they have a mental illness. It took me years to admit that I had a mental illness. I didn't realize that actually from the time I was 18, I was having episodes, but I was in denial about it because I was ashamed. Okay?
Right.
So many years later,
which is sad because in so many other illnesses people are dealing with, and they're not fixating on that issue. So.
Exactly. In any other illness, you would simply do whatever you could to get help.
That's right.
And so the sad part about it is that people with mental illnesses, because of the stigma, isolate, stay home, stay in denial, and they just keep cycling in and out of episodes and not moving on with their lives. So the mental health profession realized that there was a significant advantage to hiring peers, people with mental illness, people with a lived experience of mental illness, to work alongside therapists and psychiatrists and social workers. Our goal, so as a peer specialist, what I bring to the table is being able to show somebody that it's okay to have a mental illness that you have to deal with, and I'm living proof of that. There's a trust factor there that is instant, because if they say, well, there's nothing wrong with me, and I don't want to do anything about this, and I don't want treatment, in the telling of my own story, they will rethink this. Slowly but surely, they will maybe take my hand and start to take ownership of this. It's a component that really makes a big difference in terms of coming out of isolation, having the peer.
There's a lot of things there. It's kind of drawing people out and certainly showing them that they're not alone, which is important in any form of illness, actually.
And they can look at me and they look at me and they don't see crazy.
That's right. That's right.
And they see somebody who's actually functioning and
That's
even
right.
thriving.
Right.
And I've been there, and I know exactly what they're going through.
Right.
And I can say I've been there too.
Right. Have you been through the experience yourself of working with a peer specialist early on? Or?
No, well, the way I did, because when I started attending the mood disorder support group in New York in the early 90s, there were no peer specialists. This is a really new profession of maybe in the last 7-8 years.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And so the way I connected with peers was through attending the groups and having a facilitator in those meetings who was running the groups who was just like me.
Interesting.
And everybody in those groups were in a different stage of recovery, so every peer there was offering me something.
Right.
And making me feel very that I belonged, that I wasn't crazy, that there were all kinds of strategies for getting and staying well.
Right. So you actually experienced firsthand the benefit of working with peers.
That's why I'm doing it, because it saved my life.
Wow. Wow.
It saved my life.
And powerful message. And
Yeah.
that's something, unfortunately, when people isolate and stigma causes people to turn away from recovery, often the results are not good for people suffering from mental illness. People do kill themselves or deteriorate. So,
with full disclosure, this is very personal to me because I had 2 siblings who committed suicide,
wow.
who are much older than me, and what I now know is that it didn't have to happen.
Right.
They were not treated properly. They were in denial. Nobody in my family talked about it. It was a no-no.
Wow.
And so there were no support groups, and it was, and the stigma was 100 times worse then.
Right. Right.
And so they unnecessarily lost their lives.
Wow.
And I know for a fact if they had the resources that are available now, the right resources,
Right.
the right resources.
They'd still be alive.
Yeah, no question in my mind.
That's an incredibly powerful story. And you're currently involved now running a weekly group session for mood disorders at Southampton Hospital and our Ed and Phyllis Davis Wellness Institute. Let's talk about mood disorders a little bit. Now, these are terms, often we hear people say things about, different psychological conditions and bandy them about, but frequently we really don't know what we're talking about. So what's a mood disorder?
Well, that's a good question. I change up the title, often. I mean, I might say mood disorders, I might say mental health disorder, I might say mental illness. I think that the sort of bottom line is someone who has a diagnosable mental health issue. Okay, so this is for somebody who actually has a brain chemistry dysfunction that needs to be corrected. And as opposed to someone who is in a circumstantial depression because of loss, or whatever it might be, or circumstantial anxiety. This is something that it has become almost systemic in your being. It's something that it's almost like a flight or fight response that's gone haywire, where it's the switch is always on. And so the people who come into our groups, most of them have a diagnosis of depression, anxiety disorder, bipolar disorder. And now we even have a few with schizoaffective and schizophrenia who are coming in too, which is great. I'm really happy about
that those folks
bringing in the rest of within the spectrum.
So in the counseling sessions, it can be any one of those conditions. And diagnosis of it is something I would assume you can't do the diagnosis.
Oh, no.
Can you explain how that works?
Right. So if the people who come into our groups have already been diagnosed. For the most part, by a psychiatrist. So, and they have their own, they have their own psychiatrists. Often they have therapists as well, but they're coming to our support groups for that added peer piece of group support in a safe environment with other people who understand exactly what they're going through. And some people come into our groups who aren't diagnosed, but they know something's wrong. Okay, so they may find down the road that it's important for them to get evaluated.
Okay.
And get properly evaluated by a psychiatrist or a psychopharmacologist who can determine, does this person indeed have major depression, an anxiety disorder, or bipolar illness, for example.
So someone doesn't necessarily need a diagnosis to come to the group?
No.
Oh, okay.
Not at all, because people are
Right.
coming in saying, all I know is I am
Something's
really depressed and I'm really anxious and I don't know what's going on.
Right.
So then the group, over time, through their own stories,
Right.
will say, in my experience, I didn't know for a long time either, but then I went ahead and got an evaluation and I'm really glad I did.
Right.
So the idea is those people who are coming in with, absolutely having no idea what's going on will learn in our groups about mood disorders, get educated about them, hear other people's stories, and then go, you know what, can I have the name of your psychiatrist? I want to go get evaluated.
Right.
Because for either to rule it in or rule it out.
Right. Right.
So,
And I would think that experience of just getting them to that point of acknowledging I want
Big.
to see somebody is a big step.
It's
Big step
huge.
for people, right?
so we don't, assume anyone should be diagnosed or go get evaluated. What we just simply do is support them.
Right.
And hopefully over a period of time, the idea is to come to your own conclusion.
Okay.
It's a personal choice.
Right.
But when in a safe enough environment, and with all these other people telling their stories on a weekly basis, they come to their own conclusion.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
So we don't have to tell anyone what to do, and in fact, you don't give advice and you don't tell people what
Right.
to do. You speak from your own experience.
I've heard it said, do you agree that people really, whether it's issues around mental health, people really need to come to that conclusion themselves if it's really going to make a difference? So.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Right.
And, I know that there are certain cases in which they, they're forced into
Right.
hospitalization or whatever. I understand that. It's a crisis, whatever.
Right.
But yes, they have to come to their own conclusion.
What are the causes of mood disorders from your experience in reading?
Okay. The primary reason is stress.
Okay.
If you, and this is kind of I don't mean to make a blanket statement
Right.
because there are all kinds of reasons for developing a mood disorder, but the common ground is stress. So if as a child, let's say, and I grew up with great emotional distress in my life, and I never wanted to get off the school bus, and so my fight or flight was always on.
Okay.
And so if you grow up with a lot of trauma, neglect, emotional distress, and it's not dealt with,
Right.
you will bring it into your adult life because you don't know not to. It's how you functioned your whole life. And if you have a predisposition
Okay.
to a mental illness or a mood disorder, meaning a genetic predisposition,
So there is a genetic component.
there is a genetic component.
Okay.
Not always, but
Right.
it's pretty common.
Right.
Then you are going to become susceptible.
Okay.
And I do believe that's exactly what happened to me
Right.
in terms of the first episode and then the second and the third, because I didn't know how to, I didn't know how to soothe myself.
I've heard that term, self-soothing, that some people just don't know how to do that.
They don't know how to do it because
Okay.
they think this is just the way it is.
Okay.
And so that is the primary reason.
Wow.
Which is a sad state of affairs.
Right. Right.
That there is a real emotional basis in this.
Right.
Having said that, drugs, marijuana and all kinds of things can also trigger an episode.
Really can exacerbate it? Or
For
trigger?
somebody who's
Okay.
never had an episode before.
Okay. And we've seen that sometimes in the emergency room, people that have come in and essentially had a psychotic break after they've taken a drug or something. So,
Exactly.
right.
So that's another reason for having
Right.
one. But I just think the most important part is stress
Okay.
as a basis, but then the brain chemistry changes as a result of it.
Right.
And so often a medication is absolutely required to be able to manage the brain chemistry imbalance that has occurred. But therapy is also just as important in order to understand the reasons why you are in emotional distress in the first place. You have to learn how to self-soothe.
Okay. Yeah, I want to get into that, but first,
Okay.
how common would you say mood disorders are in a population?
Oh, how about 1 in 4 people?
1 in 4, wow.
Yes,
Wow.
and that's the fact.
Really?
Yep.
Interesting.
1 in 4, which amazes me because, you know, on top of everything else, you think about stigma.
Right.
Hello?
Absolutely right. You
And
would think with that many people, it would be something we'd accept at this point.
Exactly.
So, right,
And
yeah.
4 out of 5 people have some relationship with a mood disorder, to a mood disorder because of a loved one, a friend, a colleague.
Interesting. I know that in the hospital, the statistic we often see is that upwards of 50% of hospitalizations or emergency room visits are somehow related to a mental health component to it. It may not be that per se, but there's often a mental health issue in the background.
It makes
causing
sense, don't you think?
It sure does. It sure does.
Because also mental health problems lead to drug abuse and and dangerous behavior and all kinds of stuff.
Absolutely. And multiple mental health or mental illnesses that fall under the mood disorder rubric or name.
Yeah.
So what are some of those other mental illnesses?
Well, I think I've named them. It's depression. Now there are different kinds of depression, though. I don't know if you want me to get into those kinds of details.
Whatever detail you feel comfortable with. Right?
So because there's a range. I mean, some people suffer from what's called kind of a low-grade dysthymic depression, which is, you function, but you just never feel okay.
Okay. That's what I was going to ask. What are some of the symptoms of the depression, maybe?
Just, that it's always hard to get out of bed, but you do always go to work, but you're not, there's always a weight.
Right.
So there's that kind of a dysthymic depression where you can function, and you do function, but it's not a happy, it's not a good situation.
Right. It's a general sense of sadness that some people
Not even
suffer from.
sadness, because sadness is actually, sadness is different from depression.
Okay.
Because sadness is simply is mourning something, feeling feeling sad about something. Depression is just a burden. It's a weight.
Okay.
It's not sad.
Right.
So that's so you have dysthymic, and then there's atypical depression that doesn't totally look like depression to everybody, but
Right.
and it's called atypical.
Those are the people who you just look like they're upbeat and suddenly you find out they are suffering from depression?
Or, it could be that, after this atypical depression just doesn't respond to medications the way somebody who has a more typical depression does, and they
Okay.
struggle more and they're harder to treat.
Okay.
So some psychopharmacologists and psychiatrists are experts in atypical depression.
Okay.
And then there's the worst kind, in my opinion, is major depression, and that's what I suffer from when I have it.
Okay.
It's where you literally feel like you've gone through the trap door and it's black, you cannot get out,
Right.
and there is nothing that gives you pleasure. Everything is a flat line, during my worst one in the early 90s, which got me to the support group, I didn't get out of bed for most of the year, a year.
Oh my God, wow.
Well, that was also me not treating
Right.
not getting properly treated
Right.
because I was still in denial.
Right. If you don't mind my asking you, what motivated you to finally go get treatment?
Because my life for the most part was very good.
Right.
I was very successful in television. I
Right.
was happily married, young son.
Right.
I had good friends, and I thought, what am I doing?
Right.
This is life or death, because
Right.
I couldn't have stayed in this place.
Right.
I would have ended my life. You
Right.
can't stay in that place.
Right. Right.
So I just thought, okay, what do I want?
Right.
And I said, I want to live.
Right.
So then I just did everything I could.
Okay.
And everything I could was, I remember sitting on the floor of a bookstore in Manhattan, and I picked off every book there was on mental health. And a story started to emerge. I began to see, oh, that's me, that's not me. And all of a sudden, I was less afraid because there are all these case stories and studies and everything else. There's names for this thing. There's treatment for this thing. So I did that first, and then I started attending the support groups, and then I did a lot of research to find a great psychopharmacologist, not just any psychopharmacologist.
You think that part of the support group and the realization is that it's giving people a sense that you can overcome this, or that there is a way out? So
this is, to me, the most important part of the peer support groups is that what you come to understand is that A, you aren't fundamentally flawed. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with you. You're not crazy. You're not alone.
It's not something you did or you
it's
were
not,
a bad
It's not your
person.
fault.
Right, exactly.
You know, we talk about this in the groups every week. It's not your fault. And that there is a recovery path for everyone, not just stability, because so many people come in thinking this is probably as good as it's going to get. You know, which is going to be, living barely functioning, but somehow still on this planet. And our approach is no. What we believe in is a meaningful and purposeful recovery for every single person who walks into the groups, but it's personal. So what looks like a meaningful recovery to you, will be different from what it looks like to me. But the idea is that a meaningful recovery is living well in your community, and all that implies. And so, people...
Which means different things to different people. I mean, some people are very social, some are not, but they're... So what does living well mean to you? To me, it would be spending a lot of time with my family, being engaged with friends, getting out to dinner once in a while, and having a healthy work-life balance.
There you go. And so for each person, they have to figure out what that means, and then they have to fight for it. So, but in the groups, what we all are to each other is a support team, cheerleaders, we're motivators, and we are helping each other every single week make one small step of some kind, one small step forward.
I'm fascinated with your description of your own personal journey and when you made that realization. And somebody may be watching us now who's in the depths of that depression that you're describing. And what would be your recommendation to them? What would be a first step you would recommend to that person?
Well, I get calls all the time now out here, individuals saying, I don't know what to do. And I'm isolated. I feel like my life is over, and I just say, I completely understand, and I've been there myself. And my first thought to them is, see if you can get yourself out of the house and try one group. Just come to us one night, and see if you can get there. And I said, I know it's no small task to get there when you're feeling as badly as you do. It's the last thing you want to do. But if you can get there one time, you'll get a sense of what's possible. And I said, I know you feel that nothing is possible right now, but that's your isolation talking. And that's your depression talking. It's not reality. But it looks like reality to you. So come out and join us, and let's help you get some perspective. And let's get hope back in your heart.
And what should they expect at a first meeting? I mean, is it something that some people might be afraid, I just can't do that. I can't face people right now, or am I going to have to talk or perform? What would they expect at that first meeting?
I always say in the beginning of my groups every Thursday for newcomers, I said, we welcome you all. We're so glad that you're here, and you can use this group any way you want. And so if you don't feel like talking, that's absolutely fine. And if you'd like to just listen, I mean, I knew somebody in New York who I was attending groups with for a number of years in Manhattan, and he didn't speak for 3 years, this guy. He is now...
for 3 years.
For 3 years, he never spoke in a group. But he got so much out of it, and now he runs one of our sites. He's one of our senior facilitators. He's on our board of directors.
Wow. It's amazing, amazing.
So each person needs to use the group the way they feel most comfortable. Most of the time, they start talking.
Right, they do.
Because they can't help themselves. They're so interested in what everybody else is saying. And so we just say, if you feel like it.
Probably a little identification also. Hey, it isn't just me, right?
Well, that is that's the light bulb.
Right.
And not only that, they're discovering that maybe, other people actually in the room are worse off than they are.
Right.
I mean, they're seeing a full range, and they're also seeing a full range of amazing courage.
Wow.
Because of some of the group members who've been coming for a long time are, have been through it, and they've come out the other side. So they see so much courage and strength and the human spirit.
Wow.
And it gets them going too.
And we're almost out of time, unfortunately, because this is incredibly powerful, just listening to you talk about this. But I do have an important question. Somebody who's watching who may have a friend or a family member that's suffering. What would your recommendation be to them?
I would never, unless they asked me my opinion, I would never tell them, that they ought to go see a psychopharmacologist or a psychiatrist.
Right.
What I would first say to them is, you need to get educated.
Right.
And I would recommend, once I understood a little bit about them, I would recommend certain books for them to read, a couple of websites, and I would say, come and get your feet wet here at the support groups.
Okay.
And then over time, they will make their own decision about psychiatrists and therapists and what kind of a team of support to put around themselves or a loved one.
Okay.
Because every team of support is different.
Okay.
I may not need what you need.
Right. Human beings are so different from each
Exactly.
other. Right.
So, somebody may need, part of the team of support may be, going to the gym every day to get exercise and having somebody make sure they get to the gym.
Right.
Who knows? But you start looking at what that team of support is going to be.
Right.
And then that support becomes part of your life.
And very, very quickly, because we are out of time, but tell us a little bit about the mood disorder groups at Southampton Hospital, and when do they meet, and how would I sign up for it?
So they're called the East End Mood Disorder Support Group,
Right.
and they meet every Thursday night at 6:30, from 6:30 to 8 in the Wellness Center.
Right.
And we run a group for peers with mood disorders, and then we run a group right next door for family members of people with mood disorders. Sometimes the families come together with the peer, sometimes a family's coming on their own because they have somebody in trouble who's in California.
Okay.
And it's drop-in.
Right.
There's no appointment, there's no cost.
Okay. Just come on
just
over
come.
at 6:30, and I'm sure the information's on our website also then. So
It is.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fascinating and a really important topic, and I'm so happy that you're working with us here and that you're available out in the community.
Well, I'm
here.
thankful that you let me.
We're thrilled to have you here.
I appreciate it very much.
Please keep it up and the good work that you're doing, Tory.
Thank you very much.
And for anyone who might be interested in additional information, if you'd like, please call our Wellness Institute at 631-726-8800. That's 631-726-8800, and they can answer all the questions about timing, when the groups are, where the groups are. But we would please ask anyone who's interested to reach out. I'd like to thank all of you for watching us today, and I'd especially like to thank our friends at CTV for producing and airing the show in our Southampton community, and as always, our friends at LTV for airing our program and the East Hampton communities. If you have a question, a concern, an idea for a future show, or just need help navigating the health system out here on the East End of Long Island, please feel free to call my office at 631-726-8555. We're here to help you. Good health, everyone. Have a good day.